Hey there, you are listening to Double Page Spread, brought to you by the fine people at DCBS, the Discount Comic Book Service. Whenever you're looking for those hot variant covers, that book that might be sold out at your local comic shop, whatever you need, you want to start up a pull list, that's awesome too. They will help you out. They are there for you with their excellent customer service and their tremendous discounts each and every day. DCBService.com, as well as Black Phoenix Alchemy Lab. If you've been enjoying American Gods or you're really into any Neil Gaiman stuff, they have perfume lines based on that, as well as they have new beard oils for the men listening. You know, anybody out there, you want to try some new stuff with your facial hair, they've got beard oils for you. They have wig sprays. If you are a drag queen and you happen to be listening to this, they have like wig sprays based on different contestants from RuPaul's, drag race. So go check their stuff out over at blackphoenixalchemylab.com. And I hope you're having a wonderful day. I hope you've checked out the Threadless store. I hope you're gonna go pick up a Double Page Spread T-shirt soon. That'd be awesome. I'd love to see you in it. And thank you for listening. Hey there, you're listening to Double Page Spread. I am your host, Miss Wendi Freeman, and tonight I am joined by a repeat guest, Mr. David Gallagher. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me, Wendy.
Oh, I'm so happy. I'm so happy to hear you're okay.
Yep, I'm doing pretty well after a little bit of a health thing, but I'm super excited to be here, and thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, anytime. I love talking to you. So you have a new book out. Now, let's refresh people's memories about your previous book, The Only Living Boy.
The Only Living Boy is a story about a 12-year-old boy named Eric Farrell who runs away from home and finds himself in this patchwork planet with mermaid warriors, insect princesses, mad scientists, and dragons. It's all about how he struggles to find, how he overcomes adversity in a really troubling world. So it's really about finding courage and being brave. It's kind of like a cross between the Bridge to Terabithia and the Jungle Book, with a little bit of like Thunder the Barbarian and the Island of Dr. Moreau thrown in.
Right. I feel it was very Commandy-esque.
Yeah, it's funny. When I started working on the book, I'd never read Commandy.
Oh.
And then after we had launched the book on our Kickstarter and published the first issue, people were like, dude, this is like Commandy. And then I read it and I was like, well, there's like some surface similarities, the way that Adventure Time or Battling Boy have surface similarities. But, or even the best-selling children's book, The Last Kids on Earth. There are a lot of surface similarities, but I think our story really delves deep into like overcoming psychological trauma and adapting to being like that strange place between being a kid and being a grown-up.
Right. Well, Commandy, of course, is very much like Planet of the Apes. It's like there are all these sort of similar threads that go through all that stuff, you know?
And they all come from a story that was published in the Pickwick Papers in 1904 called Knock, which was all about, it was like the last man on earth stood alone in his living room. And then there was a knock on the door, and then you're like, and it was like a super short sentence, but then you ended up with stories like Omega Man and, like a lot of really cool, like I Am Legend. Those things all come from with basis in those stories.
That's fascinating. That's really interesting.
And so they're like Vincent Price movies about it. And in fact, The Only Living Boy was, really based on my experiences. I was working for the NYPD and we were on set for the movie I Am Legend. And I was thinking at the time, like, oh, wow, it's really interesting. Like Will Smith is this super badass, like this 40-year-old super capable guy, would be really facing monsters. And I was like, well, he's got a lifetime of experience. But what if you were like a 12-year-old white kid with no experience battling monsters who was raised in the suburbs. And that was really sort of the genesis of The Only Living Boy. And right around that time, The Only Living Boy in New York, the Paul Simon song, played on my iPod. And I was like, oh, wouldn't it be cool to have this story? And so, it really, the basic concept really emerged from there.
Yeah, also sort of like that time-honored tradition of children on adventures on their own. Like that idea of like, what do you do without your parents? What do you do when you're the only person you can listen to? There are no authority figures.
Right. So,
Yeah.
and that's really interesting. It's really sort of finding that sense of purpose and drive and courage and self-reliance that you don't really get when you're living in New York in the suburbs. So it was really about exploring the same sort of themes you might find in Goonies or Treasure Island, and really sort of building on those.
That classic sort of Huck Finn thing, even.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So you don't really see a lot of those sorts of stories right now. We really wanted to tell a story that had this huge adventure fiction aspect, but then at the same time, really had a psychological component to it. And so really dealing with, trauma and tragedy, and giving kids the opportunity to voice that and experience that, and really delving into some of the mental health aspects of it all. So, yeah, there's monsters and there's dragons and there's mad scientists and there's weird, like, multi-headed creatures. But at its heart, it's this story about finding the courage within yourself to overcome.
Yeah, yeah, and you delve into even more psychological problems in this one, in The Only Living Girl. So yeah, so our main character, you have Zee Parfit. Is
Right.
that the name?
And she's the daughter, yeah, Zee Parfit,
Mm-hmm.
and she's the daughter of a mad scientist. So she's the daughter of the mad scientist from The Only Living Boy. And it's really about, for her, she's dealing with two common themes all at the same time. She's dealing with this sort of loss of her father that she never really knew, but this kind of like the sense of sort of being ignored by your parent and never really feeling like you're never good enough to be as a kid, so always this sense of expectation. But then she's dealing with her own perfectionism and her own feelings of self-worth. And for her, unlike Eric, where it's all about finding the courage, she already has a lot of courage. She presents a lot of courage to our readers and to her friends, but really she's suffering internally. So it's a nice counterpoint to Eric, where she presents herself as super capable and flawless, whereas Eric is super goofy and kind of awkward. She is like, really on top of things and has an answer for everything. But the truth of it is that she's really suffering, and she has to really sort of struggle with trying to understand and reclaim and maybe redeem her father's legacy, and this legacy of this world that her father built, this patchwork planet that her father built, where almost every one of the inhabitants was somehow tortured by her dad. So she's this outcast. She's this daughter of this monster. And then she really has to sort of decide whether or not he's worth redeeming and whether or not his legacy is worth redeeming. And at the same time, kind of save the planet. I mean, she's been left with this thing. And so she finds it incumbent upon her to really sort of clean up the planet. And so there's a lot of like really deep psychological stuff for a 12-year-old girl to deal with.
Well, also the fact that she's been like in a coma.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
I mean,
So,
that's the ultimate trauma. Like, she thought she was dead. She was pretty much left for dead.
right. So in the opening of The Only Living Girl, and in the story of The Only Living Boy, the basic premise is that Zee Parfit wakes up and the apocalypse is over. Like, everybody's won. There's been a giant battle. The apocalypse is over. What do you do when you wake up after the apocalypse and you have to sort of deal with the outcome? And she has to deal with the fact that she's been in suspended animation for years, as all this stuff, his life has progressed without her. And I don't know how many of your listeners have been in a coma or have suffered any sort of really traumatic accidents, but that process of sort of dealing with life going on without you is really traumatic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And these are some of the same themes Steve Ellis and I, the illustrator, grappled with when we had worked on Green Lantern Corps, is really like this aspect of trauma and how trauma really imprints itself on you when you're younger.
So, did you have to, did you sort of delve deeper and work with anyone in the mental health field to really sort of explore this?
Well, my background's in neuroscience,
Oh, I didn't know that.
so
Oh.
I was able, yeah. So I have an undergraduate degree in neuroscience, so I was able to, and in education, so I was able to pull from those experiences. I also have pretty profound epilepsy, so I was able to pull from my own experiences suffering from traumatic brain injuries and concussions and all these other cognitive impairments that I was able to then really put forth in this story and my own feelings of imperfection and perfectionism, and showing everybody that like the world that you present is this world of like super cool, like I've got it all together, when inside you may be suffering. So I was really able to draw from my own experiences dealing with this stuff.
You do always seem like you have it together, you know? I mean, you talk openly about like how you've changed your diet and how you've, worked to help your health over the years, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think all that stuff's really important. It's like, for me, like I really try. I not only changed my diet, but I exercise, and I try to get good night hours of sleep. But there are a lot of stressors ultimately that can change anything from the change of seasons to an overabundance of stress to any sort of change in medication. All those things can sort of have an adverse effect on one's mental health, not just like not just the mental health, but also the physiological health. And so it was really important to bring some of those things to the forefront and talk about them in a way that I think that readers can really understand. It's like, it's hard to present that you've got it together, and hopefully in reading the story, people will understand that you can just be human, you can just be yourself.
Another big part of this story is, and a thing that I'm always curious about is whenever anybody writes some sort of story about science, and about like where she has to come up with like these gadgets and these ideas and all these things on the fly, like how much of that is actual sort of science versus just kind of like magic, but we're going to call it science?
It's about 75-25.
Hmm.
So it's about 75% real science and about 25% like, let's fudge it. So, like, for example, in the Only Living Girl, the premise is that they're dealing with this new form of radiation called after all, and after all is the primordial force of the universe. So beyond everything you've seen in our world, after all of that, there is even more. So after all is named after that force that is beyond infinity, that is beyond eternity, and it's this primordial force that exists in space and time. So it's very quantum physicsy. It's like a manifestation of quantum science, or So so it really deals with all of that. That's the manifestation of the energy, and we envisioned it as a form of like primordial radiation. So beyond classification. So there's a part in the story where Z has to make a device that drains that energy and reflects that energy and absorbs that energy from her friends who are possessed by the energy. The energy is so much, consumes her friends in this state of like rage and anger. So the process of building a device, and using these specific type of crystals that she finds in order to build this gauntlet, that's all based in like real science. So like there's that, what can we find that is based in real science and use it? And then what is this fictional thing that we've got that is like radiation, but primordial, and what is it that we can use? So the 25% is this fictional energy that we've created, but then the 75% is how you build a device that reflects and absorbs it and tracks it.
Well, also, it must be difficult to write about these sort of, bigger scientific ideas and make it still very young adult, like making it appealing to.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's yes. I mean, there's that aspect, but then I think about. Are you familiar with the teleporter problem? It's called the teleporter problem. But are you familiar with the teleporter problem that was
No.
presented in Star Trek?
Oh,
So the have you heard of it?
I've heard of the idea, but I forget. Please explain.
So the idea is that when you're in the Star Trek, you're in Star Trek, you're in the Enterprise, right? And Scotty is like, let's beam you down. So you're on the Enterprise and you're beamed down. Your body is disintegrated and it's reintegrated on the planet. So is that you, or is that a clone of you?
Right, right, right. It's also like, do you remember that Stephen King story about like the teleporter idea where like it was this experimental form of teleportation and they finally made it available to the public, only you had to keep your eyes shut the whole time or else you went mad?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's those same basic ideas. So it's basically that same premise. Dr. Parfit, who becomes Dr. Once, and Zee, are actually based on a philosopher whose last name was Parfit, who came up with a lot of these ideas, like I want to say, I'm speaking off the cuff, but in the 14th century. So he was like, imagine, if you would, that you were disintegrated, you teleported from one place to another, and you were disintegrated. Are you still you, or are you somebody else? Are you a clone of you? You know, and what is that like? And that was the basic premise behind some of the science we presented in The Only Living Boy, and it's sort of that same ideology and themes and sort of scientific quantum mechanic ideas that we're really presenting in The Only Living Girl. It's this idea of thinking about science and thinking about life in a totally different, new way.
What made you go with having a girl and changing the protagonist in this instead of just sticking to Eric?
Well, I love Eric in The Only Living Boy. I think he's an amazing character. But when Steve and I were working on the story, even as far back as 2012, there were two things that really sort of popped into our head. One, that there was a lot of story to be told about Zee. And you know, because I don't want to say that she's a prop in The Only Living Boy, but she's a character we don't really see a lot, other than her getting tragically hit by a car, right? So, and that's kind of sad, you know, and that's really tragic. But and she becomes the reason that Dr. Once becomes the monster that he becomes, and that trauma becomes the reason that Eric becomes lost in the Petra planet the way he does. So ultimately, there was an interesting point in recognizing that we wanted to try to give agency to every character. And while we recognized we couldn't give agency to Zee in that moment, that there was a lot of her story to be told. We had, without spoiling The Only Living Boy any more than I already have, we lose one of the protagonists in The Only Living Boy, and there was an opportunity to fill that void with a new protagonist, you know, and we really wanted to take advantage of that. So there was an opportunity, as we lost one of the protagonists in The Only Living Boy, to really do something interesting and bring a new protagonist into the story. And with that, we were able to look at Zee and look at Zee's story, look at where we wanted to take it, and really build something really interesting. So ultimately, that became the impetus for doing this. Plus, while we were selling the book at shows, so that was already sort of preeminent in our mind. But when we were selling the book at shows and at conventions, you know, The Only Living Boy is obviously about a male character, and one of the things that we were worried about was the title might dissuade young female readers, even though there's tons of female characters in The Only Living Boy. What we didn't want to do was isolate readers through some sort of gendered name. Yes, we have like a ton of female readers and a ton of male readers, but we didn't want the title to throw people. So we wanted to really create something that was a little bit more embracing of these characters and their world. And it was a really prime opportunity to give, when we finished The Only Living Boy, a really prime opportunity to tell a great story about Zee, her journey, and give her the agency we wanted to give her from the beginning.
Also, I feel like Zee and Eric are very different characters because I feel like so much of his journey was about his self-worth and like his guilt.
Right. And hers is, she's super competitive, more so than Eric. And you even see that when you see her in The Only Living Boy, so you see her being like, her and Eric are at a crosswalk and she's like, want a race? And, like, she's very competitive. She already believes that she's awesome. She already knows that she's awesome, but she's got so many other things happening all at once that make her just a really complicated, nuanced character. So Eric was all about dealing with trauma in a very different way. We don't really talk about how boys deal with trauma. We always expect them to man up. And we generally let society, I'm speaking very broadly,
Yes.
we let girls be much more emotional. But Zee's not emotional the way that Eric is. Eric's very emotional, and Zee is much more logical. But both of those require a balance, and hopefully at the end of the story, both characters will find that sort of balance that they're looking for.
Let's talk a little bit about the other characters, like the explain to me like the mermaid race and so forth.
Oh yeah, so we have this mermaid race. They are the super pacifist, very meditative, very contemplative mermaid creatures called the Myrmidonians, and they're very sweet. But all the males in their race were murdered by this chimerical dragon named Balakar. It was very hard. But they, as a race, they learned to prosper. They learned to procreate through parthenogenesis, and they were really able to grow and become their own sort of capable characters. And they're ruled by this triumvirate of like really, really capable, really thoughtful leaders. However, Morgan is sort of like the mermaid warrior of the group. She rejects the entire premise of their race of being contemplated. She doesn't want to hide underwater like the rest of her race, and she is driven to be the best fighter in the entire world. So she's got a very combative, very gruff and cynical outlook on life. So she is very much like, I can beat anything. She's got the confidence that Eric and Zee don't have, because she believes that she can overcome anything. She believes humans are fragile, and ultimately that emotions are weakness. So she is fantastic. She has a sort of romantic liaison with one of her race's arch enemies, a member of the sectarian race. They're all insect warriors. And his name is Phaedrus, and he's like this Captain America like paladin character. And he is training Morgan Morgan's really, really well versed in bow staff fighting, and she is a weapons master across the board. But she is given the opportunity to master not just her culture's form of martial arts, but then given the opportunity to study sectarian martial arts, which involves things that mermaids aren't really good at, like flying. So like she's in combat stances, learning how to do all these really awesome martial arts combat actions, but without this sense of like flying or without wings. And so it becomes a big struggle for her because she's now put in a really uncomfortable position of learning her arch enemy's fighting styles while really trying to be comfortable in her own skin.
Mm-hmm. She's kind of like a warrior monk almost, because she comes from that
Yes.
sort of Zen race type background.
A very angry warrior monk. I mean, yeah, because yes. So, but yes, definitely like warrior monk. But like, whereas I think warrior monks are very like meditative, she is not. I mean, she's like, like people are like, pretend you're the ocean, pretend you're the ocean. Imagine yourself being really calm and everything's okay and everything is calm and peaceful and still. And she's like, I don't want to be an ocean. I want to be a tidal wave, and that's kind of how she acts. She's very like, I don't want to say she's chaotic, but she's definitely very, very like forceful in her opinions and her beliefs, and is very gruff. When everyone's like, "Oh, well, let's do it the peaceful way," she's like, "I hate the peaceful way."
So she's kind of along for the ride with these two, with Eric and Zee.
Yeah, she's along for the ride with. In the course of the story, her boyfriendish like romantic liaison is in charge of taking care of a bunch of sick people, which is sort of the impetus. All these people in the headquarters, their new home have been poisoned by this after all energy, and Morgan finds herself really wanting to spend time with her boyfriend Phaedrus, but he has duty to take care of them. So she's like, well, if I can get the cure, I can spend more time training with my boyfriend that I don't really like, but kind of not really, but kind of, sort of.
My will they, won't they love interest.
Yeah, kind of like the Maddie and David of Moonlighting.
Yes.
It's very adversarial, but it's sweet but adversarial.
Mm-hmm.
Because she's never really experienced romance before or emotions before, and so it's all very awkward to her. So she expresses it best through sarcasm and fighting.
So tell me all about Steve Ellis. How's Steve doing?
Steve is doing great. Steve and I just came back from the American Library Association event in Washington, D.C.
Wonderful.
We're doing a lot of really great work together. We are working on, obviously, The Only Living Girl. We just did a comic project for the Children's Tumor Foundation, which was fantastic. And, he's continuing to do a lot of great work with in the gaming space, which is fantastic. And, this is we're going on our 13th year of collaboration. So I'm really excited about working with him on The Only Living Girl and more amazing, astonishing projects as we move forward through the year. I think we've got a Dungeons and Dragon-esque like project in the works that I can't share too much about, but I'm really excited about I'm really excited about working with him. He's just so great to collaborate with.
Did he have a lot of say in the plot of Only Living Girl?
Yeah, typically what will happen is I'll write like the plot, and then I'll be like, how about we do this? And he's like, that's great, but how about we do these things? And so in doing these things, like ultimately in the plot, he has some feedback and we go back and forth a little bit about where certain things should happen. But where Steve's contribution is most valued is the storytelling aspects of laying out the pages. So, I'll write the script and then I'll send it to Steve and then we'll talk about what makes for a better visual story. And that's really where his expertise shines through. So ultimately, that's the kind of stuff that has made working with him so great, is his ability to tell just an amazing story visually.
Yeah, also the colors in this book are so amazing.
Yeah, and that's we worked with Chris Sotomayor, who did a bunch of the flatting and primary color, and then Steve came in and really spruced it up and brought out a lot of the colors and really made it feel in keeping with the previous volumes of Only Living Boy. And I'm really happy with ultimately how the book looks. And oh god, and if you've seen the hardcover, those end papers are gorgeous. They're all filled with Zee's blueprints for her gauntlet and other little inventions that she wants to make, and that's a really fun thing to see.
Nice. So tell me, how is the ALA? How's going to one of those like different from going to the comic conventions?
Well, one of the things that's really interesting about going to the American Library Association is that you're filled with people who are there to read. Not only are librarians there to, because they're readers, and their appetite is just ravenous. One of the things that's really interesting is that they're there to also serve their library communities. So the people who came to the Paper Cuts booth were really, really interested in picking up books and picking up stories that were reflective of their reading community. And it was really nice to talk to librarians who loved the book and really wanted to get into, loved The Only Living Boy and were really interested in getting into The Only Living Girl.
Cool. So Paper Cuts, they've been really good. They've been helping out a lot. Like mainly, you still put things out digitally first, right? Or
yeah, we well, right now for The Only Living Girl, we're releasing things. We're releasing stuff in print first, and then following up on digitally. But yeah, it's definitely been that digital readership that has really driven the sales of the digital readership has really driven the sales of the print books. So we release, The Only Living Boy on Tapas. We release it's available on Comixology. It's available on our own website. It's available on platforms like Noise Trade, and that's been a really, really fantastic opportunity to get people engaged and then bring them to picking up the print volumes.
it's recently been such a thing. I've seen people online complaining about how their local schools are so discouraging of kids reading comics. And I feel like that but there's so many more of these librarians who are embracing the medium now. It's
right, because ultimately I think that it's how comics represent this really interesting opportunity to lower the barrier to entry and to get into some really deep, really difficult topics with context that print doesn't often provide. Mm-hmm. So what you're able to learn and see is how characters behave in relation to the context and see their moods and see how they're reflected when dealing with some really, really heavy themes visually in a way that you can't see in prose. And I think that's what's really important is when you're dealing with really difficult topics, watching characters' mannerisms and behaviors and stuff is really crucial in terms of how you tell the story and giving younger readers an opportunity to understand how to react both in body language and gesticulation and in mood.
Well, also that's important, especially like we were talking about neurodiversity and like autism and stuff. Like that's important to a lot of kids growing up dealing with those issues.
Right, exactly. And so what you really want to do is one of the things that I really learned in dealing with the autistic population when I was a special ed teacher was the opportunity to really show moods visually. So we used to use a lot of flashcards to show like how's this person feel? Sad. How's this person feel? Happy. And by showing those cards and by showing the subtlety of differences, you're able to really sort of help kids understand like what jealousy is or what confusion is or what ambivalence is. Obviously you start with the happy, glad, sad, mad, easy cards, but then really sort of dealing with like the more subtle nuances of like, holding your eyes down or like biting your lower lip and what that shows, and human beings are infinitely complex, but if we're able to use comics and cartooning to sort of communicate those ideas, I think we're in a much stronger, better place.
Yeah, well, those are good for everybody. Like learning those verbal cues, those little sort of facial expressive cues and stuff, or things most of us haven't mastered.
Right. Yeah. But teaching body language and teaching those sorts of things, and that's I think that's where graphic novels really shine in a way that prose doesn't always shine. Mm-hmm. Or prose communicates it differently, but in ways that I think that children just have a difficulty sort of comprehending when you're dealing with these heavier themes of grief and tragedy and ambivalence and terror and menace. And I think that there's a nuance to it that I think is really important. And there's a reason that comics as a medium have persisted for over 100 years. It's that level of ability to communicate these things visually. And we're moving to becoming a much more visual society. We're communicating in emojis. Two emojis put together is a comic strip. Yeah. If you show somebody like a sad sign and then show them a poop emoji, you know that something shitty is about to happen. Um, and I think that's really important. I think it's really important to deal with that level of understanding that the visual lexicon is changing, and we need to, as creators and as educators, really be able to adapt with the times.
See, I just like to use emojis randomly. Like, I just like to insert random, bunny lion face. I feel that says everything.
Oh, a bunny lion face does. It shows me that you are both scared and happy at the same time. Cute, cute, but with a roar.
There you go. That's exactly what I was trying to convey. That's the message
Right.
I'm getting out there at the bunny line.
Right.
Let's talk about current events in comics. So
Okay.
okay, so like Vertigo, they announced DC announced the official shuttering of Vertigo this week, and I just kind of wanted to talk. I've been wanting to talk to everybody about sort of like the impact of Vertigo on our lives. Did you have a favorite Vertigo book?
I did. I think my favorite Vertigo book, at least my initial Vertigo book, and I think the one that's really stuck with me the longest, is Sandman, and the impact that those books have had on me. But also, I mean, the early books like Shade the Changing Man, I think really did a lot to change the way that I thought about like the way that we tell stories in comics. I mean, I think there are great stories, great detective-based stories like Hellblazer, Sandman Mystery Theater. Transmet, which was originally Helix title that became a Vertigo title. Why the Last Man, and all of those are really profound. But I think the impact and the way that Sandman was able to showcase so many different themes, I think was really, really super important. I mean, there were a lot of books that were great in their heyday, like certainly Preacher, I think deals with a lot of really, really important cultural themes. Because I think that the thing about Vertigo is that it's kind of like watching a car accident. So you're both attracted to it because you can't stop but stare at it, but you're also repulsed by it. You're also repulsed by it, so it really creates this sense of like it may run counter to your values, but at least you're educating yourself and broadening your horizons. So learning about like the treatment of animals in Animal Man, and having Grant Morrison really talk about PETA in the early 90s.
In We Three,
or dealing with dealing with themes like politics, or dealing with themes like transgender characters and the nature of desire and things like Sandman, or dealing with religion and its effect on the populace in something like Preacher. All those things are really, really profound. And I think that when Vertigo was at its best, it was telling stories that really, really challenged conventional ways of thinking. I mean, even if you look at Doom Patrol and what Doom Patrol has become, for the DCU app, like there's a lot of really, really powerful themes about, being normal and being queer and being an outcast and being disabled. And I think all of those things are just really, really powerful ways to connect with an audience and get us to broaden the way we think about our experiences as human beings. And I think that when Vertigo worked well, it was addressing those themes.
Yeah, like I think I was just thinking earlier today, I was talking about, queer comics and the idea of the fluidity of gender in comics and stuff. And like I remember the first character that really made an impact to me like that was Lord Fanny from The Invisibles.
Right.
I think Grant Morrison has done so much for a lot of that type of thing, and that was such a huge Vertigo thing.
Right. I mean, and those you saw similar themes in Doom Patrol, and like with Danny the Street being this teleporting transvestite street.
Yeah. And they've done so well with that on television. Like, who would ever think that would be a thing that would translate,
Yeah, and that's exactly it is the nature of these characters and the way that they are depicted visually, and the nature of the nature of the themes and topics they're talking about, queer romance. Like one of my favorite Vertigo books is Kill Your Boyfriend.
Yes,
And I think
absolutely. I
its
loved that.
ability to communicate a bunch of really rebellious themes, I think is really powerful.
Also, I was thinking about that Peter Milligan one, The Extremist.
Right.
Yeah,
Or Minx, when he was doing Minx.
right. Like he did a lot of fetish stories that would never have been told. You
Right.
know?
Not at all. And so there's a real opportunity there to do. There was a real opportunity to do there something really, really powerful. And while I love what Image is doing now, I don't think it nearly it had the same sort of cultural impact or powerful cultural impact the way that Vertigo did. Vertigo was punk rock in a way that punk rock wasn't even talked about, that way. Like it was. I mean, Vertigo was an opportunity to show that comics had matured, but it wasn't just matured in like we're just cursing. No, characters were cursing, but with weight behind their stories. It wasn't just like foul-mouthed characters shouting any number of obscenities. It came from a place of like sort of this emotional rawness and emotional rottenness that was just previously unheralded in comics. I mean, you saw some of it in the Marvel's Epic line, and you saw some of it in 2000 AD, but ultimately where it really matured and manifested was in the Vertigo line. And while I am sad to see the line fold, it's interesting to see. I mean, just today it was announced that Joe Hill is doing his own line of create-our-own horror comics through DC.
Oh, that's cool.
And I like the opportunity for these boutique imprints, not full imprints, but boutique imprints like Young Animal and the stuff that Joe Hill is doing. I love seeing them pop up and telling their stories, and then telling their stories to some sort of resolution and getting out. So I love that opportunity. I love seeing that. Even the Wonder Comic stuff that Bendis is doing.
Right.
I love these boutique imprints and the impact that I think that they can have. Telling a curated line of books that allows you to follow that curated line without having to follow 56 other books, And I appreciate that.
Well, Vertigo was like following your favorite record label, like you just trusted I could just pick something up with that tag on it, and it was going to be my jam, It
was the Sub Pop Records of comics.
Right, I was thinking it's like the Discord of comics, exactly. Yeah, you had that trust in that, like, this is gonna be crazy. I'm gonna really enjoy that, So.
Right.
And I mean, I'm very happy for Shelley Bond and for Karen Berger. I mean, I'm glad they're out there getting their own,
Yeah, I mean, Berger Books and Black Crown and even Ahoy Comics, which has Stuart Moore in it from his Vertigo days. I mean, all those things I think are really, really powerful opportunities to tell the kind of stories that they've always wanted to tell. And I really appreciate that aspect of it.
Yeah, that's cool. Anything else you want to discuss?
Well, I'm working on a video game.
Oh.
So I'm one of the writers on Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon Breakpoint video game that comes out from Ubisoft on October 4th.
That's a mouthful of a name. Ghost Recon Breakpoints.
Well, I mean, yeah, but it's not like Avengers Endgame or Avengers, and it's not even, it's Marvel's Avengers Infinity War.
Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon Breakpoint.
Breakpoint.
I love it. Come on. So yes, tell me about that.
Well, so that's super exciting. It's sort of this first-person shooter game. Not first-person shooter, but it's a military-style shooter game. You play a main character known as Nomad, trapped on this island that is filled with drone technology that has been commanded by one of the evil members of your own platoon, a character named Cole Walker, and he's voiced by John Barenthal, the Punisher.
Oh,
so it's super cool to basically be writing an evil version of the Punisher. I mean, an eviler version.
I mean, really, poor John Barenthal. Like, he's just getting typecast.
I know. So that's been a tremendous experience. Being able to add my experience writing comic books to video games has just been a tremendous opportunity to continue telling really, really strong visual stories, and I absolutely love it.
That's great. Congratulations. When's that coming out?
October 4th.
Nice.
So that's super exciting. So those are the two big projects that Steve and I are working on. And that's just been a tremendous amount of fun to be able to work on those projects and really sort of learn how video games can help my writing as a comic book author. So it's just been a really tremendous experience. I've been working on the game for about a year now, and I can't wait for it to come out.
Cool, cool. I mean, what I imagine writing a shooter game like that, it really just like that must be very complicated trying to sort of lay out the idea, like what's going to happen, what the ideas are.
It's fun. I work with a really great team of narrative designers and mission designers, and we all go through it. We spend a lot of time really thinking about the ways that players can interact with the game, and that's been just a tremendous experience.
Mhm. Cool, cool. Well, so yeah, so now we've got Only Living Girls out. This first collection
Right.
of is out, right?
And
Island at the Edge of Infinity.
right, and the second volume will be out at the end of the year.
All right, fantastic. So thank you very much. Thank you for talking to me.
Thank you so much for having me, Wendy. I really appreciate being on the show.
Absolutely.